The rain fell hard that night, pounding on the rusty roof of the small house in the quiet town of Kibi. Inside, a woman named Amanda lay on a thin mattress, holding her newborn baby girl. The child's skin was pale, her hair white like cotton, and her eyes a soft pinkish color. Amanda's heart was full of love, but her happiness didn't last long. Her husband Patrick stood in the doorway, his face twisted in anger. He stared at the baby, his eyes wide with shock. "What is this?" he shouted, his voice shaking the room. "This child cannot be mine. Look at her. She's different." Amanda's heart sank. "Patrick, please," she begged, tears rolling down her cheeks. "She's your daughter. I swear it. She's just special." "Special?" Patrick's voice was sharp like a knife. "You've brought shame to this family. How could you do this to me?" Amanda tried to reach out to him, but Patrick stepped back, his face hard and cold. "No, I won't raise another man's child. Get out of my house. Take that thing with you." Amanda's hands trembled as she wrapped the baby in a thin blanket. "Patrick, please don't do this. Where will we go? What will we do?" But Patrick didn't answer. He grabbed Amanda's arm and dragged her to the door. The rain was pouring outside, and the wind howled like a wild animal. "Leave!" he shouted, pushing her out into the storm. Amanda stumbled, clutching her baby tightly. The rain soaked her clothes, and the cold made her shiver. She looked back at the house, but Patrick had already slammed the door shut. Her heart felt heavy, like a stone in her chest. She walked through the muddy streets, her feet slipping in the wet dirt. The baby cried softly, and Amanda whispered to her, "It's okay, my love. Mama's here. We'll find a way." But deep down, Amanda didn't know what to do. She had no family in Kibi, no friends to turn to. The town was small, and everyone knew everyone. What would they say when they saw her with a baby who looked so different? As she wandered, a taxi pulled up beside her. The driver, a man named Francis, rolled down his window. "Madam, are you okay? You'll get sick out here in this rain." Amanda looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Please, sir, I have nowhere to go." Francis hesitated. He could see the pain in her eyes and the tiny bundle in her arms. "Get in," he said finally. "I'll take you somewhere safe." Amanda climbed into the taxi, holding her baby close. The warmth of the car was a relief after the cold rain. Francis drove quietly, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Amanda," she whispered. "And this is Sandra?" Francis nodded. "Well, Amanda, you and Sandra will be safe with me. I have a small house. It's not much, but it's warm and dry." Amanda felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. When they arrived at Francis's house, he gave her a dry blanket and some food. Amanda sat by the fire, holding Sandra close. For the first time in days, she felt a little peace. But as she looked into the flames, her mind wandered back to Patrick. Why had he turned his back on her? Why couldn't he see that Sandra was just a baby, innocent and pure? Francis sat across from her, watching quietly. He could see the pain in her eyes, the weight of her struggles. "You don't have to talk about it," he said softly. "But if you ever need someone to listen, I'm here." Amanda nodded, tears welling up again. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for helping us." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside Francis's small house, there was a glimmer of hope. Amanda didn't know what the future held, but for now, she and Sandra were safe, and that was enough. The sun rose over Kibi, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Amanda woke up early, as she always did, to prepare breakfast for Sandra and Francis. The small house was filled with the smell of warm porridge and the sound of Sandra's laughter. Over the past few months, life had changed for Amanda. Francis had become her rock, her safe place. He treated Sandra like his own daughter, even though she looked different from other children. Sandra's pale skin and white hair made her stand out. But to Francis, she was perfect. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Francis sat Amanda down. The air was warm, and the sound of crickets filled the night. "Amanda," he began, his voice steady but soft, "I know life hasn't been kind to you, but if you'll let me, I'd like to be your family. I want to take care of you and Sandra." Amanda's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Francis, then at Sandra, who was playing with a wooden toy on the floor. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, Francis, we'd love to be your family." They married in a small ceremony a few weeks later. The village women cooked food, and the children danced to the beat of drums. Sandra wore a little dress made from colorful fabric, and she twirled around, her laughter ringing through the air. For the first time in years, Amanda felt truly happy. Frances was kind and hardworking, and Sandra was growing up surrounded by love. But not everyone was happy for them. Frances's relatives often came to visit, and they didn't hide their disapproval. "How can you raise another man's child?" his aunt, Mama Essie, asked one day. She was a tall woman with a sharp tongue. "Look at that baby. She's cursed. She'll bring bad luck to this family." Frances stood his ground. "Sandra is my daughter," he said firmly, "and Amanda is my wife. If you can't accept that, then you don't need to come here." Mama Easy huffed and left, but the whispers didn't stop. People in the village talked, saying Sandra was different, that she didn't belong. But Frances didn't care. He loved his little family, and that was all that mattered. One rainy afternoon, Amanda and Frances decided to visit a nearby town to buy supplies. They needed flour, sugar, and new clothes for Sandra, who was growing fast. "We'll be back by evening," Amanda told Sandra, kissing her forehead. "Be good for Auntie Grace, okay?" 8 years old, Sandra nodded, clutching her doll. "I will, Mama." The rain poured heavily as Frances drove the car along the muddy road. The windshield wipers worked hard to clear the water, but the visibility was poor. Amanda held onto her seat, her heart pounding. "Frances, maybe we should wait until the rain stops," she said nervously. "We'll be fine," Frances replied, trying to sound confident. But the road was slippery, and the rain showed no sign of letting up. Suddenly, a truck appeared out of nowhere. It was going too fast, skidding on the wet road. Frances tried to swerve, but it was too late. The truck crashed into their car with a deafening sound. The impact was devastating. The car flipped over, landing in a ditch. Amanda and Frances didn't survive. News of the accident spread quickly through the village. Sandra was playing with her doll when Auntie Grace came to her, her face pale and her eyes filled with tears. "Sandra," she said softly, "something terrible has happened." Sandra didn't understand at first, but when she saw the crowd gathering outside, when she heard the whispers and the cries, she knew something was wrong. Her parents were gone. Frances's relatives arrived soon after. They didn't cry or mourn. Instead, they looked at Sandra with cold eyes. "She's not our blood," Mama Easy said. "She's cursed. Just look at her skin color. She's the reason this happened." Without a second thought, they took Sandra to an orphanage on the outskirts of town and left her there. The orphanage stood at the edge of town, a large, gloomy building with cracked walls and windows that rattled in the wind. Sandra stood at the gate, clutching her small bag of clothes and the doll her mother had given her. Her heart pounded as she looked up at the building. It didn't look like a place where children laughed and played. It looked cold and unwelcoming. A tall woman with a stern face opened the gate. "Come in," she said, her voice sharp. "You'll be staying here from now on." Sandra followed her inside, her feet dragging on the dusty floor. The other children stopped what they were doing and stared at her. Their eyes widened when they saw her pale skin and white hair. "Look at her," one boy whispered loudly. "She's so weird. Is she a ghost?" The children giggled, and Sandra felt her cheeks burn. She wanted to run away, but where would she go? She had no one left. The woman led her to a small room with rows of beds. "This is where you'll sleep," she said, pointing to a narrow bed in the corner. "Put your things there and come to the dining hall for lunch." Sandra did as she was told, her hands trembling as she placed her bag on the bed. She looked around the room. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and the air smelled damp. She missed her home, her parents, and the warmth she had once known. At lunch, Sandra sat alone at the end of a long table. The other children whispered and pointed at her. "Why does she look like that?" a girl asked loudly. "Is she sick?" Sandra kept her head down, trying to ignore them, but the words stung. She wasn't sick. She wasn't a ghost. She was just different. Days turned into weeks, and Sandra's life at the orphanage didn't get any easier. The staff were too busy to pay attention to her, and the other children made sure she knew she didn't belong. They stole her food, tore her clothes, and called her names. "Cursed child!" they would shout, laughing as they ran away. Sandra spent most of her time alone, hiding in corners or sitting by the window, staring out at the world beyond the orphanage walls. She missed her parents terribly. At night, she would cry quietly into her pillow, clutching her doll and wishing things were different. But even in her loneliness, Sandra found strength. She remembered her mother's smile, her father's kind words, and the love they had given her. "Be strong, Sandra. she whispered to herself. Mama and Papa would want you to be strong. One day, a couple came to the orphanage. They were well-dressed and kind-looking, and Sandra's heart leapt with hope. Maybe, just maybe, they would take her home. The children were lined up in the courtyard, and the couple walked slowly down the line, smiling and talking to each child. When they reached Sandra, their smiles faded. "What's wrong with her?" the woman asked, her voice low but loud enough for Sandra to hear. The man shook his head. "We're looking for a normal child," he said, his voice filled with pity. Sandra's heart sank. She had heard those words before. Normal. She wasn't normal, and she never would be. The couple moved on, and Sandra stood there, her hope shattered once again. She was used to rejection, but each one hurt just as much as the last. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed, Sandra made a promise to herself. "I don't need them," she whispered. "I don't need anyone. I'll be strong. I'll survive." But deep down, she wondered if anyone would ever see her for who she truly was. On Sandra's 18th birthday, the orphanage handed her a small bag of clothes and a little money. "You're an adult now," the matron said, her voice cold. "It's time for you to leave." Sandra stood at the gates of the orphanage, her heart pounding. She had no family, no friends, and nowhere to go. The city stretched out before her, big and intimidating. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, clutching her bag tightly. The streets were crowded and noisy. People rushed past her, their faces busy and uninterested. Sandra walked aimlessly, her stomach growling with hunger. She had no idea where to go or what to do. That night, she found an uncompleted building on the edge of the city. The walls were bare and the floor was dusty, but it was dry and sheltered from the wind. Sandra curled up in a corner, using her bag as a pillow. She missed the orphanage, as hard as life there had been. At least she had a bed and food. The next morning, Sandra woke up to the sound of cars honking. Her body ached from sleeping on the hard floor, but she had no time to rest. She needed to find food and work. She walked to the market where vendors sold fruits, vegetables, and clothes. Sandra approached a woman selling oranges. "Please, ma'am," she said softly. "Do you need any help? I can work for food." The woman looked at her eyes narrowing when she saw Sandra's pale skin. "No, I don't need help," she said sharply. "Go away." Sandra's heart sank, but she didn't give up. She asked at every stall, but no one wanted to hire her. "You look strange," one man said. "You'll scare away my customers." By the end of the day, Sandra was exhausted and hungry. She found a garbage bin behind a restaurant and dug through it, looking for something to eat. She found a half-eaten piece of bread and ate it quickly, trying to ignore the sour taste. Days turned into weeks, and Sandra's life didn't get any easier. She slept in different uncompleted buildings, always moving to avoid being chased away. She did the dirtiest jobs people refused to do, cleaning gutters, washing toilets, carrying heavy loads. People paid her very little, but it was enough to buy a small meal. Everywhere she went, people stared at her. "Look at her," they whispered. "She's so strange. What's wrong with her skin?" Sandra tried to ignore them, but the words hurt. She had spent her life being judged for how she looked, and it never got easier. One day, as she was selling fruits at a market, a man with a camera approached her. He was tall and kind-eyed, with a warm smile. "Excuse me," he said. "I couldn't help but notice you. Would you mind if I took your photo?" Sandra hesitated. No one had ever asked for her photo before. People usually looked away or whispered behind her back. But something about the man's gentle demeanor made her nod. The man introduced himself as Daniel, a photographer. He took a few photos of Sandra, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "You're incredible," he said. "Your features are so unique. The world needs to see your strength." Sandra didn't know what to say. She had spent her life being told she was strange, cursed, different. No one had ever called her incredible before. Over the next few days, Daniel came back to the market to talk to Sandra. He listened to her story, his eyes filled with empathy. "You've been through so much," he said, "but you're still standing. That's amazing." Sandra felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone saw her for who she truly was. "Sandra," Daniel said one day, "I want to send your photo to a modeling agency. You have a unique beauty that the world needs to see. What do you think?" Sandra was terrified. She had spent her life hiding, trying to avoid the stares and whispers. How could she stand on a stage and let the world see her? I don't know," she whispered. Daniel smiled gently. "You're beautiful," he said, "not in spite of your differences, but because of them. The world needs to see that." Sandra's heart raced. She had never thought of herself as beautiful, but Daniel's words gave her courage. "Okay," she said softly. "You can send my photo." Daniel's face lit up. "You won't regret this," he said. "I promise." The modeling agency was buzzing with excitement when Sandra walked in for the first time. The walls were covered with glossy photos of beautiful models, and the air smelled like expensive perfume. Sandra felt out of place, but Daniel squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You belong here," he whispered. The agency's manager, a stylish woman named Clara, greeted them with a warm smile. "Sandra, we're thrilled to have you," she said. "Your look is unique, and the world is ready for something different." Sandra's heart raced. For the first time, someone saw her differences as something special, not something to be ashamed of. But not everyone shared Clara's enthusiasm. Lisa, the agency's top model, glared at Sandra from across the room. Lisa was tall and glamorous, with long, dark hair and perfect features. She had been the star of the agency for years, and she didn't like the attention Sandra was getting. "Who does she think she is?" Lisa muttered to her friends. "She's just a freak. She doesn't belong here." Over the next few weeks, Sandra worked hard. She attended photo shoots, practiced walking on the runway, and learned how to pose. But Lisa and her friends made things difficult. They spread rumors about Sandra, saying she was rude and unprofessional. They even sabotaged her photo shoots by hiding her clothes or messing up her makeup. One day, during a runway practice, Lisa accidentally tripped Sandra. Sandra fell hard, her knees scraping against the floor. The other models laughed, but Sandra got up, her eyes filled with determination. "You can't break me," she said, looking straight at Lisa. "I've been through worse." Lisa sneered. "We'll see how long you last." But Sandra didn't give up. She had faced bullies before, and she wasn't about to let them win. With Daniel's support, Sandra kept going. He was always there for her, encouraging her and reminding her of her worth. "You're beautiful, Sandra," he said. "Not just on the outside, but on the inside too. Don't let anyone make you forget that." Slowly but surely, Sandra began to rise in the fashion world. Her photos appeared in magazines, and her face was on billboards across the city. People were captivated by her unique beauty and her inspiring story. She gave interviews, talking about her struggles and how she had overcome them. "Beauty isn't about looking like everyone else," she said. "It's about being yourself." Her words touched millions of people, especially those who had been bullied or judged for being different. One day, Clara called Sandra into her office. "We've been invited to a major fashion show in Paris," she said, "and we want you to be the star." Sandra's heart leapt with excitement, but also fear. Paris was a big deal, and she would be walking the runway in front of the world's top designers and photographers. "What if I mess up?" she asked Daniel that night. "You won't," he said firmly. "You're stronger than you think, Sandra. You've already overcome so much. This is your moment." The night of the fashion show, Sandra stood backstage, her heart pounding. She wore a stunning dress that shimmered like moonlight, and her hair was styled into soft waves. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. "You're ready," Daniel said, kissing her cheek. "Go show the world who you are." When Sandra stepped onto the runway, the crowd fell silent. The lights were bright, and the music pulsed through the air. For a moment, she felt like running away. But then she remembered all the times she had been told she didn't belong, all the times she had been rejected and mocked. "This is my moment," she thought. "I won't let fear stop me." She walked with confidence, her head held high. The crowd erupted into applause, and cameras flashed like stars. Sandra felt a surge of pride. She had done it. She had shown the world her beauty, her strength, and her resilience. After the show, Sandra's career skyrocketed. She became one of the most sought-after models in the world, and her story inspired millions. She used her platform to advocate for self-acceptance and kindness, showing people that beauty comes in all forms. Years later, Sandra stood on a stage, accepting an award for her contributions to the fashion industry. She looked out at the audience and saw Daniel, now her husband, smiling proudly. They had built a life together, filled with love and purpose. "This award isn't just for me," Sandra said in her speech. "It's for everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. You are beautiful, just as you are. Don't let anyone make you forget that." As Sandra left the stage, she thought about all the people who had doubted her stepfather's relatives, the children at the orphanage, even Lisa. They had tried to break her, but they had only made her stronger. And now, as they watched her success from afar, they could only feel ashamed of their actions. Sandra had risen above their cruelty, proving that kindness and resilience could overcome even the darkest moments. Sandra's journey was far from over, but she had found her place in the world. She was no longer the girl who hid in corners or cried alone at night. She was a beacon of hope, a symbol of strength, and a reminder that everyone deserves to be seen and loved for who they truly are. And as she walked hand in hand with Daniel, Sandra knew that her future was as bright as the lights on the runway. She had risen from the ashes, and nothing could dim her light now. Thanks for watching, dear viewers. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and consider subscribing to the channel. I'll see you in our next video.